The term biker was first popularised in the 1880s, where it obviously referred to cyclists, as this is when the cycling craze first took off across Europe. But in those days, cyclists were just like normal people, not the lycra-clad wankers we have today stumbling around a cafe in bicycle cleats like a newborn calf. In fact, they didn't even have spandex back then to make others suffer the contoured outlines of their sweaty cock balls and arse crack just because it shaved 0.5 of a second off their ride to the shops, or whatever the fuck they wear it. Nah, back then, cyclists, or bikers as they were known, just went about their normal business without any more sense of an entitlement or arrogance than anyone else. But of course, some of them were still dicks. But there were others who took their passion for riding to another level, basically hoping that someone would hurry up and pull their bloody finger out in inventing the BMX. And of course, there were those who pushed their push bikes to such an extreme that motorcycles would be a natural progression. Actually, by most accounts, early motorcycling enthusiasts were a reasonably subdued bunch who created social clubs that focused on racing, hill climbs and just riding. In fact, it appears that it was just the cops who were the mad cunts. Recently, my missus confessed to me that she once went out with a bloke only because he rode a Ducati. What she neglected to tell me was this was only a few weeks ago, but the point remains. Girls like boys who ride bikes. It may not be a slam dunk, and as in this clip from 1908, sometimes you have to improvise. But even back then, it didn't take blokes long to realise that you're more likely to get laid with a bike than without. Motorcycling greatly increased in popularity during and immediately following both World Wars, partly because motorcycles replaced horses for dispatch riders and the like, which meant they didn't have to be shot and have their loyal and faithful carcasses tossed into a pit at the end of the war, and partly because motorcycles become more abundant and refined, plus they were much more handy than cars during the fuel rationing, but mainly because motorcycling is just so much fucking fun. In fact, they'd become so popular shortly after the end of World War II that the town of Hollister, California had more than double the number of people expected for their annual Gypsy tour. Now, these rallies have been held at Hollister since the 1930s, but this is the first since America had slowly meandered into the war, and they reckon around 4,000 people rocked up. It's unclear if this was an unexpectedly large attendance in comparison to the other Gypsy tours of 47, or the 7-man Hollister Police Department was just underprepared. as now most post-war rallies not only included races, rodeos and hill climbers, but also competitive piss drinking. This new discipline's enthusiastic participants included part of the large proportion of the American servicemen who had been demobilised in California, and many of these cashed-up vets decided to buy bikes and stick around to enjoy the sun. And this is where some of today's biker folklore kicked off, as it's generally accepted that these men were troubled veterans rebelling against mainstream society, joining motorcycle clubs to recapture the adrenaline rush and camaraderie of war. But was this the standard? Surely you have to ask yourself how many were simply just ex-diggers who enjoyed riding bikes and getting on the piss. Anecdotal evidence aside, what was the actual percentage of malcontent scooter tramps to those who worked normal jobs and or had families or mortgages and the like, and only rebelled against society on their days off? To tell the truth, like most people, I haven't got a bloody clue, but it's pretty much accepted without question these days. Well, anyway, for those who haven't heard about the Hollister riots, the apparent general consensus is that the police, while waiting for backup from the Californian Highway Patrol, cordoned off the main street for a couple of blocks and pretty much just monitored the drunken bikers who had taken up residence there, blatting around and doing wheelies and shit, generally just having a good time. When backup finally did arrive with riot gas, it wasn't needed as the crowd was relatively compliant and moved to an area where a band had been set up on the back of a truck, and that's about it. And there ended up being about 50 arrests over the long weekend, basically for drunken disorderly, reckless driving, and one indecent exposure where a booze fighter motorcycle club member was spotted standing on the bonnet of an overheating Model T which was rolling down Main Street, compliantly pissing into the radio. There was also 60 injuries, all piss related, all bikers or hangers-oners, with no town folks getting hurt. In fact, the whole thing would have gone unnoticed as the local press barely mentioned it, which makes you wonder how rowdy these little towns do get. One witness reckons they get more trouble when the rodeo's in town. But when the Highway Patrol was notified, apparently so was the mainstream press. Although they didn't print anything false about the event, the sensationalistic headlines upset more than a few. Battle of Hollister, town in uproar, 4,000 touring cyclists wreak havoc. But what pissed most people off was this photo, not because this type of thing didn't happen, as it obviously did, but they objected to it being staged after the fact for some reason. Well, so the fuck what, some of you may ask? Well, this too may have all been forgotten if it wasn't for Harper's Magazine publishing a short story inspired by the event. A short story that went on to inspire the screenplay for the 1953 Brando classic, The Wild One, the movie charged by motorcycle folklore as sporting the outlaw biker image. Give me a fucking break. Even though I'd seen the movie as a young bloke, I couldn't really remember anything about it except not being all that impressed. So the other day I sat down and watched it again and immediately knew I was going to be in for a treat as one of the bikes almost took out the camera in the opening credits. Now, Marlon Brando plays Johnny Strabler, the leader of the all-white motorcycle gang, the Black Rebel MC. Not that the gang doesn't lack diversity, as some of their members appear to be at least mildly handicapped.
Please, don't cross the track. Don't get hurt. Blood makes everything slippery.
You want to see something? You want to see Johnny go? Oh, he can really go. He can really screw it on.
The beer's room, and it's got blip, 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 boom.
We want to watch the thrilling races, Daddy.
Yeah. Pop me, Dad.
I popped you, Dad. Hey, Pop, stun me, will you, Daddy-o? Come on, that's it. Stun me.
Now give me some skin and ooze it out. Just nice.
Attaboy, ooze it.
Well, anyway, after being kicked from the town for acting like a bunch of total tossers, Brando starts to form an almost autistic attachment to a motorcycle trophy that one of his subordinates stole for him in some weird childlike adoration. Heading off up the road to nowhere, these freedom-loving highway gypsies stumble upon another town to act like total twats in, where Johnny reveals to his newly acquainted bipolar love interest that his gang of rebelling social misfits are just in fact a bunch of weekend wanderers.
Where are you going when you leave here? Don't you know?
Oh, man, we just gonna go. Well, on the weekends we go out and have a ball.
Well, what do you do?
You just go. The bunch gets together after all week, it builds up. The idea is to have a ball. Now, if you're gonna stay cool, you got to whale.
Yeah, any credibility Brando's character may have had left is soon lost when, as he flees from his attackers, he reveals he runs a little bit like Phoebe Buffay. And to top it off, he has a little cry before securing his escape. In fact, the only smidgen of credibility that Brando retains in the entire movie is that the Triumph Thunderbird he rides in the film is his own personal bike, which probably explains why a member of this crazed lynch mob stopped to take the time to lay the bike down gently. Yep, I give the movie 4 out of 10, and only because Lee Marvin saved it from being totally gay. Outlaw motorcycle clubs have existed from at least the 1930s and simply meant back in the day that the club wasn't registered or endorsed or some shit like that by the American Motorcycle Association. For example, when Wino Willie Faulkner was booted from the 13 Rebels MC, an AMA registered club, and started the Booze Fighters, it became an outlaw club from its inception, as the AMA said it would never endorse a club with a name like that. So what was happening was the AMA, while doing great things and promoting and supporting motorcycling, was also creating rifts with its bureaucracy, with no greater example being that of the Outlaws Motorcycle Club, who still sport their ill feelings today. Their mock AMA patch, the American Outlaws Association, was a result of their riff of over half a century ago. Although the Outlaws MC had been around since 1935 as the McCook Outlaws, then as the Chicago Outlaws in 1950, in 1960, the AMA, as supervisors of all official races in the US, banned the word outlaw from all race clothing. The Chicago Outlaws Racing Club members initially complied with this and just wore just OMC on their jackets, but eventually told the AMA to stick it up their arse. So effectively, the American Motorcycle Association are as much to blame for the creation of the outlaw motorcycle image as anyone else, as it was them who initially created the conditions for this to happen. They literally declared who were and who were not outlaw bikers and ostracised them accordingly. So if the spotlight didn't fall on Hollister, it would have just been somewhere else. Now, this is where things started to go to shit, as up until then motorcycling was viewed as any other wholesome sporting and recreational activity. In fact, motorcycles were strongly marketed towards women in the 30s and 40s, with several all-girl motorcycle clubs attending the Hollister Rally as a testament to this. But the post-war depictions and then subsequent marketing of bikers being renegade males literally pushed women from riding their own bikes, which in my opinion was a fucking catastrophe, as there's nothing hotter than a Sheila who can ride. The media and Hollywood depictions of bikers being rebels and outlaws soon became a self-fulfilling prophecy, as it naturally attracted rebel and outlaw types to motorcycling. Or even worse, wannabes who, for a start, apparently can't throw or even find a slightly threatening looking piece of broken glass. This in turn attracted the crazy bitches who are attracted to the wannabe macho rebel outlaw types. Take young Jimmy's precautionary tale for example.
Now, if I was a young fella like you, I'd get me one of them.
You mean a motorcycle?
Yeah, they're great.
Well, I suppose so.
Well, thank you. Call again.
Taking his service station attendant's advice, Jimmy purchases a motorbike and is immediately set upon by Natalie, who is apparently rebelling against her mother. Before Jimmy knew what the fuck was going on, Nat was munted off her tits after getting into his stash, and next thing you know, she's smacking the smack, dishing out back alley blowies to support a newly acquired habit. Then the poor prick gets busted for dumping her body in the desert after she OD'd.
This chick's out for kicks and in for trouble with the born losers.
Just how was the mom initiated?
By getting it from everybody.
Neato.
We hope you take off your clothes, baby.
Who's got the acid?
Acid?
If you kids are gonna sail, we're not coming out of orbit for 3 days.
Although some outlaw motorcycle clubs started to get a bit territorial and take on gang status in the 50s, the numbers then, as they are now, are so minuscule in comparison to the overall biker community, they shouldn't even be a blip on the radar. Like, they're known as the 1%ers, but if you look at the actual stats, they are in reality the 0.001%ers in number, and that's been bloody generous. But this didn't stop Hollywood furthering the fallacy with a string of biker exploitation movies in the 60s and 70s, many of which are fucking hilarious.
Riding their throbbing steel machines, fueled with raw hatred, exploding in a brutal climax of violence. Their battle cry, kill the pig!
These are the born losers, the sickest sickle gang that ever terrorized a town, while the law stood helpless.
They're rougher, tougher, and meaner than all the others as they zoom their motorcycles towards the most violent and sadistic acts.
Waco, the long-haired kid with fury in his eyes. Anna, the beautiful young nun who rode on the back of his bike.
Modern-day outlaws, filled with a lust for vile ravage. They slake their depraved appetites on the bodies of the innocent, defiling whatever they touch.
They're wild cycle killers who get paid to hurt people.
Slugging and drugging their way to hell. Satan sadists are not a pack of imitation angels. They're modern rebels, warped by the generation gap and turned on to everything by the torrid tempo of the strange age we're living in.
He raped and killed my daughter. I will kill all of you.
More action, more thrills, and more action than you've ever seen before.
Dig the wild music from Satan Sadists on Pendulum Records. It'll blast your mind.
Oh, God, let me out of here.
But what isn't so funny was that these movies and the over-reporting of isolated incidents fostered a fear of bikers in the bumfucked backwaters of the US at least that resulted in the murder of numerous innocent riders by fuck-footed farmers and brain-dead townsfolk. The movie Easy Rider actually attempted to highlight this, although not many picked up on it, as even today it's been reported that around 20 bikers are randomly murdered in similar circumstances in the US annually. Although murdering motorcyclists for simply being motorcyclists didn't appear to be a sport in the rest of the world, they weren't exactly greeted with open arms either, which had the effect of strengthening an already strong subculture. As motorcycle rallies and events were forced out to the fringes, the subsequent feeling of being an outsider forged and strengthened the bonds within the lifestyle. The 70s and 80s were probably the golden era of bikers as, for a start, that's when bikers began to actually be known as bikers. Or, for the benefit of my brother, who is that old school he hates the term old school, bikies, as they were known in Australia and New Zealand. Although high-powered Jap bikes were mainly the go, it was during this era that Harleys began to take over the scene, as a lot of the British bike companies had gone or were going bust, and as a consequence, here in Australia at least, bikies started to look less like mods and rockers and more like Dennis Hopper. Like, everyone had their cut-off denim vests for a couple extra pockets so your durries wouldn't get crushed, maybe to whack a few rally patches on. They're also bloody handy to grab the hot bits on the bike, as to be fair dinkum about riding, you also needed a bit of a mechanical nous to be able to make roadside repairs, and also be prepared to help others in the same boat. So with this collection of kindred spirits, you could probably understand why a few of these blokes started to get their nose a bit out of joint, when with the introduction of the relatively reliable Evolution engine and the even more reliable Japanese motorcycles, any prick could technically become a biker without fitting any mould. Here in Australia we managed to adapt our terminology a tad so that the hardcore clubs and the 1%ers remain bikies, while the rest just become bikers. But even then some people struggle with that.
Look at this. Okay, which one are we going to buy?
Ooh, I don't know. That's going to be a tough call. But you know what?
What?
I think we better look at the clothes first. Make sure we got the right outfit so we look just right.
Good idea. Come on, this way.
Hey, this is it. We look good. In fact, you look so good, you're fogging up my goggles. Hey, let's go find us a couple of bikes now. What do you say? All right.
The reality is that now, in the 21st century, motorcycling is one of the fastest growing recreational activities there is. It's more popular than it's ever been, and fast completing the full circle to becoming the perceived wholesome pastime it was before Hollister. And like it or not, it's inevitable that the term biker and bikers themselves will evolve with this.